Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our Dare to Teach series of conversations. We're trying to define what we mean when we talk about the integral teacher, and we now turn to the topic of justice and hope. Now our assumptions are that you've already been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, the Dare to Teach playlist. There's 2 introductory lectures that we gave, and then I worked with the first of 4. I told you that we're kind of seeing these in groups of 4. So this will be our first of the second group. Our first group was discussions over honesty and forgiveness, freedom and love and compassion. Now, without that knowledge, much of what I'm going to say here about justice and hope will maybe not make as much sense. So I'm going to really challenge you to go back and take a look at what I had to say there, because I'm going to be building on those ideas. Now, of course, no question, issues of equity, issues of fairness are going to be included in my definition of justice, no question. But it's got to include much more than that. As we did with all of the previous 4 concepts, core values, I'm going to expand, I hope, the definition. And I mean, my goal in all of these conversations, you guys, is to challenge, first of all, myself, and then to challenge you guys as teachers to think a little bit differently and a little bit more expansively about how we think about issues of justice and hope as well. For example, I can be fair, I'm going to make this argument, I can be fair in 303 and still not be just, as I will define justice. Now, of course, justice is a very popular debate today, and yet I find it ironic that it's one of the oldest debates, right? I mean, when we go all the way back to Plato's Republic, what are we doing? We are trying to define justice. You will remember, and I've given full lectures on Plato's Republic at LearnStrong.net. You can run those lectures to granted. I've already mentioned the cave allegory. But you'll remember the Thrasymachon question of Republic 1. Is it true that might makes right? And what is justice? You'll remember that Plato will define justice using his four cardinal virtues. His 4th will be justice, you'll remember. He sees it as a balance or a harmony between wisdom, courage, and temperance or discipline. And there's no question that's going to inform some of what I'm going to think about here as it relates to justice. But remember our 3-5 paradigm, as we've outlined it earlier. That is to say, the 3, myself as teacher, the students that I work with in 303, and then everybody else that's outside of 303, whether that be my colleagues or my administration or obviously the rest of the community or the world to that degree. That's the other for me. When I think about those 3, all right, then I'm always wanting to think about how I think in that regards. You'll remember that the Buddha said, everything that you are is a product of what you have thought. And you'll maybe remember from the biblical principle of Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. To that degree, it occurred to me quite early on in my time in 303 that if I was going to be an effective teacher, and if I was going to practice justice and hope, I needed to begin to analyze, pay attention to the way I was thinking. It is an exercise that I challenge all young teachers to consider. While you are teaching, while you're in the process of going about that incredible, chaotic, energy-expending work we call teaching, start paying attention to your thoughts. And I noticed early on that while I did this, I was speaking lots, by thinking lots and lots of harsh words to myself, and to my students, about my students, sometimes even those would be spoken. Now, I'm going to make this argument later in this discussion. I have said this already. Don't worry, we're going to get to this discussion about who are these students that we're working with. But I'm going to make the argument that the students I work with now are far more sophisticated than 30 plus years ago. And I will have colleagues that will be like, I cannot believe you make that argument. And I'll show you why I think that even right here, right now. The students that we work with today are constantly observing and watching. They are amazing listeners, watchers. And they can read body language. They can read the thoughts that I have, whether as a teacher or not, I say them. If I'm thinking harsh thoughts about a student, that student can often read that. It's remarkable to me. Why? Because they're more tuned in, they're more paying attention. How are you relating to me? And I want to know about that. So it is a fair exercise to begin to study your thoughts. I would spend some time in our teachers' learning journals asking that. When you are in moments of duress in a classroom, how are you thinking? What are those thoughts? Because those thoughts will manifest themselves through action of all kinds that often we don't realize students are paying attention to because we're always being observed. While I'm dealing with this student here, these other students, remember my exemplar when I gave you that one of the student who came in on the first day and slammed her books down and had a negative thing to say about our school. I realized I was dealing with her, but I also had to realize I was dealing with everybody else who was watching the way in which I was going to play this out. So I have a goal that I give to myself. And again, you guys, I'm giving these lectures first and foremost to remind myself, what is the chief goal as it relates to justice? And it begins with gentleness. Of course, a form of respect, yes? Gentleness. Now, I'm going to define hope in 303 as the ability to accept my own and other choices without condemnation of the Spirit. That doesn't mean that I can't condemn an action of a student, but I will work very hard to not condemn the spirit of that student. Okay, this practice actually is one of the hardest for us. Why? Because we are people in positions of power. I mean, think about it this way. We have this dilemma. We can't let our students be little Nazis and bullies in our classroom. That is obvious, right? We have rules that we have to apply. We can't say that all of the actions in our classroom are relative, and therefore I can't judge them as negative. We commented on that when we were messing around with epistemology and the relativist position. There are no truths. Well, it's a positing of a truth to say there are no truths, and that the performative contradiction will condemn our relative view. So obviously, we're going to create taxonomies and hierarchies in our classroom of actions and appropriate actions, and therefore discipline is necessary. I'm not arguing that we can't and we shouldn't do that, right? We have to fight, and I use that word deliberately. We have to fight to protect the weak and the defenseless in our classroom, because sooner or later, we are all the weak and the defenseless in our classroom. Sooner or later, including teacher, we will be weak and we will be defenseless. Talk to any teacher that's done this for at least 3 years and they will nod in agreement. Oh baby, there was a moment in time I thought I had the power, and all of a sudden I realized I didn't have the power. However, all of those things can be true, and still I can't condemn the spirit of that Nazi student or that bully student. I can't do that if I'm going to practice justice. I have to honor the student's potentiality as a human being while condemning, obviously, their mistakes, actions. Okay, and just to say that, again, leads me to realize the amount of energy that it takes to be able to do this well. We'll come back to this idea of energy again. Another way that I have to say this, and this is a very controversial idea when it's first heard, but I'll say it nonetheless. I say it this way. I deeply respect a student's right to fail in room 303. Now I realize some of you immediately are offended by this, so hear me out. What I mean by this is, if I believe in freedom in room 303, then I have to give my students the freedom to fail. I have to give them the freedom to behave in inappropriate ways. Okay? I have to give them that. And when they choose that, I mean, outright failure for some of my seniors over the years, it's broken my heart. And yet I have had seniors that say, I ain't doing it, I ain't walking, I ain't graduating. It's interesting the number of those seniors who have come back to have conversations with me many, many years later. One of them, I turned around to teach his daughter. And interestingly, he was very, very aggressive about wanting to make sure that his daughter received high marks. He had learned through the experience, and there is the key, right? We're back to learning again. And to that degree, I have to practice justice in my room. I have to give students the right to fail. If they choose that right, I do not have the right to shame or bully them, or to in some way try to demean their spirit, right? and somehow consider that my appropriate response as an instructor, ergo justice. If I'm going to believe, another way to say this, if I'm going to believe in freedom, then all of my students have to be allowed to choose, right? Sometimes to fail, and again, I have to support that decision. Now, what I mean by support that decision is, again, teacher in their 3 Ds of, again, distributor, developer, destroyer. I have to be able to give them the right to make their choices. And then I have to be able to inform them what those choices mean. But I have to be able to do it with justice, with respect, with love. Think of it this way. I can, as an instructor in 303, I can be fair. That is to say, I can keep the rules and even be consistent and not be just. If, for example, I enjoy jacking certain students. I mean, think about this. So the student has behaved in inappropriate ways, under my skin, we've all been there, knows how to push my buttons, we've all been there. And finally, when I can jack that student, what kind of an attitude do I have? If I have an attitude that says, man, I am so glad I finally got the chance to legitimately jack this student, I may be acting fair, equitable, but not just in my definition. That is not justice. If I am enjoying jacking the student, then as an instructor, I'm not behaving justly. And why is this important to me? Because, and this was something, guys, that I guess I had to come to. Nobody told me this in Teachers College. I had to come to realize this. We are being observed. I am always being observed as an instructor, often without realizing how much I'm being observed. The students are always watching. Like I gave my example of the student on the first day. I mean, I have another example of this that is for us in room 303, kind of a famous one. We had a student, I think it was a sophomore class I was lecturing. I was lecturing Sophocles' Antigone at the time. I've given full lectures online of this play, but we were talking Antigone, and I was in the middle of my lecture. We had a student who was known as the student of that class and of the school, and was always in trouble with the administration. And I'm in the middle of my lecture, and he just comes in, slams the door, slams his books down on his table, interrupts my lecture, and drops the F-bomb. All of the students, of course, in this moment are going to spin around to see how I'm going to deal with this. No question. Now, I am being observed. Now, I am in a moment, in an opportunity to behave in a certain just way. And the question is, how well am I going to do it? And he looked over at me and said, "What?" And I said, "Oh, nothing. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "No, I'm not blanking okay." And I said, "Oh, I'm going to guess it has something to do with the assistant principal." "Yes, that blanking assistant principal." I said, "Well, don't worry about it. Because here in a few days, you're going to be the assistant principal, and then you're going to know what it feels like to be the assistant principal." And I swear to you, he almost came out of his chair to come at me. And I said, wait. I walked to school, you walked to school. I know you walked by that same park I walked by. This afternoon on your way home. You're a sophomore in high school. If you see a couple of 6th graders wailing away on a 3rd grader, you're going to tell them to stop. You're not going to say, "Hey, get one in for me." Because I understand, and this is what makes you so mad right now. You feel like you've been treated unfairly, unjustly, and so you're going to say, you're going to walk up to those couple of 6th graders as a sophomore, and you're going to say, "Knock it off." But what if one of them looks back at you and says, "Or what?" At that moment, you just became the assistant principal. What are you going to do? The room got quite silent. This is the point that I'm making. It's in these moments that we can live justice, teach justice through our actions. And all of a sudden, my student had to think. He had to, for a split moment, the insight for him was, "Oh yeah, you got me." Students, by the way, don't just watch with their eyes. They watch with their ears, and especially, I believe, they watch with their hearts. An at-risk student, and again, I've said this many times, all of them are at-risk students, but I did have a student who was known to be at risk, and he was very quiet for several weeks, and finally he said to me, he confided to me, "I've been watching you. I got to figure out if you're the real deal or not." It makes sense. All the adults in his life had let him down. Come on, let's be fair. This is often why they are at-risk students. They can't trust any authority figures. Why would he trust me? Simply because I'm a teacher. And so he told me, "I've been watching you. Not how you treat me, but how you treat everybody else in the room." I got it. I understood what he was saying. Students, I believe, want discipline. That is to say, they want consistent rule keeping in the room. But they want to also see how I feel, right, about my keeping the rules. That is to say, can I do it respectfully? Can I do it justly? Or do I have this kind of sense that, yay, I get to jack somebody? Now, there's a reason why this quest is so difficult in my estimation. Everything's always changing in a classroom. In 303, everything's always changing. It's very dynamic. For example, what once was an action that was acceptable and just might all of a sudden not work and not be acceptable, depending again on student population. We're always familiar with this. So the other one that makes this tough is, as I fatigue as an instructor, I have less energy, it's harder for me to read my own thoughts, and it's harder, therefore, for me to act justly. So, to finish now, we have a goal. I want to become, in 303, you want to become, in your classroom, a better listener. Listening with the eyes, not just the ears. Listening with the heart. Being readers of energy within the room. Of course, this will require not only tremendous energy, but tremendous courage. And for me, they go together. Courage, the topic we'll speak to next. So, the big five, let's come back to it to finish. Can I learn to practice justice and hope in my epistemology? That is to say, that humility that says, you know what, I could be wrong about this student. Can I learn to practice justice and hope as it relates to ontology? We can fatigue in our body, our mind, our spirit, and so can our students, and so can those outside. Am I able to understand that and to appreciate that? How about psychology and the fear that can keep me from acting in just ways? That desire to want to just stick it to a student who's obviously been a thorn in my side for a long time. Or what's the sociological dimensions here of our conversation? Can I respect the students or the administration that I don't like? That is a tough one for us, no question. And finally, the question of theodicy, or why bad things have to happen. Can I be just without judging my own self or my students and their spirit especially? And how do I feel when I have to discipline a student? Can I read my thoughts in that moment? Maybe I have to jack a colleague, or I have to respond in a certain way to an administrator. Can I show respect throughout all of that? Well, I want to dare you to practice justice and hope. In your teacher's learning journals, I want to challenge you to write about a time that you did practice justice and hope, showed respect, and it worked. A time when you maybe failed, and that's always tough for us. I'll go back to finish with one more reading from Gibran's prophet. Then said a teacher, "Speak to us of teaching." And he said, "No man can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith, his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. The astronomer may speak to you of his understanding of space, but he cannot give you his understanding. The musician may sing to you of the rhythm which is in all space, but he cannot give you the ear which arrests the rhythm, nor the voice that echoes it. And he who is versed in the science of numbers can tell of the regions of weight and measure, but he cannot conduct you thither. For the vision of one man leads not its wings to another man. And even as each one of you stands alone in God's knowledge, so must each one of you be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth." I want to challenge myself and all of us to practice justice and hope. And of course, that's going to take a whole lot of courage. That's what we'll come back to next. Thank you.